Oh, well, welcome to Seminar Monday. My pleasure to introduce John Willis this morning. John Willis is with the Southern Experiment Station of the USDA Forest Service. I'm introducing him because he was a student, PhD student of mine. He came from Colorado State, was a PhD student in the early 2010s, graduating in 2014, did some really cool work on the interactive effects of gap size, distance to seed source, and surface disturbance on northern hardwoods regeneration. Some areas that really hadn't received a lot of attention before. He's received a lot of interest in that work that he did during his time here. When he left here, he went to he joined the Forest Service. They joined him. And went to Mississippi initially, and then went to Auburn. He has been with them since. He has charged over nearly a half dozen of the experimental forests in the southeastern Forest Service area. And he has done lots of different work, been very productive. And lots of it has focused on the fire ecology and the effects of fire on the structure of southeastern pine forests. I'm guessing he's going to talk about some of that stuff today, but I'll let him do the talking. Hand over to John. So,
awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I graduated from here in 2014, and I thought about this as I was walking through campus today. That's 12 years ago. So I'm excited today to share some of the stories of what I've been up to, with familiar faces in the room, and meet some new faculty members that weren't here when I was here. So thanks again for the invitation. Really do appreciate it. So we're going to talk today about some of the mechanistic foundations for restoring and managing open southern pine ecosystems. And what I wanted to spend some time first off, because where I stand today as Michigan State, is recognizing that Michigan State's actually played a big role in this story over time. I'm probably missing some individuals, but specifically Brian Powlett was a graduate of Michigan State University. He worked at the Jones Center in southern Georgia in the mid-90s. Did a lot of really interesting work looking at the natural disturbance regime along pine ecosystems. And Dale Brockway is also a Michigan State grad. He was advised by Don Dickman. And Dale has done a lot of really interesting work in restoration of ground layer, generating southern pine forests, also Michigan State. So I have the fortune of following up Dale. So there's been a lineage of Michigan State influence in southern pine story over time. So just to get everyone oriented in what I'm talking about in open pine ecosystems, just broadly the structure, we want to start with that. We're looking at uneven aged, open stand structure where light is abundant, hitting the forest floor. Typically, we're looking at 98 to around 250 trees per hectare, or 35 to 70% stock forest. The dominant feature and the key feature for us in terms of restoration is all about the ground soil, the ground layer. It's all about having herbaceous vegetation. This is truly a grass that has tree count. This is something I've learned to appreciate over time. I've come at it from a forestry perspective. I'm now looking at it from more of a range perspective. And the end goal is getting that herbaceous vegetation. Once we get that, we're in pretty good shape. It's really hard to get that over time. That's really the difficult thing in getting these systems restored. Probably lots of folks have heard about this. Longleaf pine and southern pine systems in general are biodiversity hotspots. You can get up to 42 species per square quarter meter. Okay. Typically, again, all in the understory, what we get it. And another salient feature is you have very little organic fluid buildup on the forest. The reason for that is fire. That fire is the tie that bonds all of this together. It doesn't matter what pine we're talking about. If it's going to be an open forest ecosystem in the southeast, there has to be frequent disturbance to keep it open. For example, Mobile, Alabama, not far from where I'm at, where I work quite a bit, they get 65 inches of rain a year, and it's generally evenly dispersed throughout the year. The growing season's around 265 days a year. Yeah. You can grow herbaceous vegetation in trees very, very rapidly. So if we're not burning, we're not keeping these systems open. And much of the southeastern United States is trying, it's begging to be a heartland system. It wants to be a heartland system. The only thing that's keeping the pines on the landscape is this frequent low-intensity surface fire. And, you know, it depends on where you're at throughout the range, but typically fire would be, it would occur in the system every 2 to 4 years, sometimes more frequent. As my colleague in the University of Missouri showed Mike Sambaugh this example. You had actually annual fires from 1852 to 1856. This is in Louisiana. Now, the thing you get with, and I should also point out that these fires occurred throughout all seasons. We had them in the dormant season, we had them in the growing season. We had lightning ignitions, which were primarily thought to be in the growing season, and in the dormant season, we would have Native American ignitions. So there's a legacy of seasonal burning all throughout all seasons, which has implications for some of the understory biodiversity. So lots of fire all the time throughout the range. It's really the key. Now, one of the things I didn't say in terms of describing the structure of these open systems, I didn't influence what species was in the overstory. And this is something that I'm really starting to pursue as a line of research is, does it really matter what species of pine we're working with? And the reason I kind of went down this road is the restoration process a lot of times is long, it's expensive. And so how can we speed these things up? And so myself and a group of other folks in the Southeast worked on this review where we first evaluated the species-specific traits of the 4 major southern pines. So it's longleaf, shortleaf, loblolly, and slash pine, and the length or the width of the bar denotes, you know, whether that particular trait is stronger for that species. So if we just look at understory flammability, we evaluated that longleaf pine is more flammable than the other southern pines. And that's largely based off of this work by Morgan Varner, showing that longleaf pine typically has higher flame height, more fuel consumption, and shorter fire duration than a lot of the other southeastern species. And some work we did with cones down here where we put cones and plots equal densities. Longleaf pine, which is in blue, was the hottest, but compared to loblolly pine, which is in green, and shortleaf pine, which is in kind of that army green, they're fairly comparable. But if you look at it to one of our music invaders, sweet gum, there's a big difference in your cone smoldering temperatures. There's some thermal images, a picture versus 1,000 words. This is longleaf, C and D. This is 10 minutes after fire temperature. Look at the max temperature, it's 422 degrees Celsius. Compared to sweet gum, we're looking at about 76. So the smoldering temperatures and its combustibility, yes, longleaf pine is like yes. It can burn really hot. And so that's how we get away with things like having annual fires. There's not a lot of fuel out there, but that stuff is really, really hot. Okay. But with all that being said, some of our other southern pines, shortleaf pine, right there is loblolly pine. They're also on the flammability end of the spectrum. Okay. And so that kind of got us thinking, if we're okay with the assumption that flammability is the key thing holding these open pine ecosystems together, and if we can burn at comparable intensities, can we actually shorten the restoration process simply by using what's on the landscape now? And so we posed that question. We looked at these species traits, but we imposed them on an open forest structure where the trees are mature. So this is what an open woodland structure, the overstory trees are mature. What impact is that going to have as it translates over? And we think it's going to be minimal for that fire understory flammability at maturity. So basically what we're arriving at with this is that structure may be more species identity if we can get that structure on the landscape. And that picture itself, it's not longleaf pine in the overstory, that's slash pine. And the understory, get the herbaceous understory. We have RCWs in that state, red cockaded woodpeckers, one of the primary wildlife species we're managing for. We have gopher tortoises. Now, it's not perfect. We're going to lose some things if we use loblolly, in particular, some of our wind resistance, things like that. It's going to go down, but we can create that pretty rapidly. Whereas instead, if we're clear cutting and planting, it's going to take us about 3 decades to get back. In no way is this a complete story. I hope over the course of my career, we can refine this table and we can kind of get at some of these relationships that we don't really know. But at least initially, in terms of flammability and fire resistance at maturity, we think we'd be in pretty good shape with really just emphasizing structure rather than species. And this is a picture, just kind of, this is like one of my favorite places on earth, called the Scrub Course. It's in Tallahassee, Florida, on the property of Tall Timbers. You've got every major southern pine in that system. You've got post oak, you've got southern red oak. They just keep fire on every 2 to 3 years. You still have the herbaceous understory. You still have red capitated woodpeckers in there. We're getting, and it's still a highly biodiverse understory. And really, that's an old field that they let grow up. They just maintained it through thinning and time to add that density of fire. So I think this is a really good example of what we can do if we just emphasize fire and structure. Another thing you can do, this is coming from the Jones Center. Again, this is a slash pine overstory where they've underplanted longleaf pine. They're trying to convert it into a longleaf pine over time. So they're using the slash pine as sort of a bridge to get to eventually a longleaf dominated stand. But in the meantime, they're still maintaining habitat for a lot of the species that they're managing out there. This is a unique one I came across in Georgia a few weeks ago. I had not seen this one before. This would be really rare. A wildlife manager who has black oak in the overstory, and 12 years ago, we had underplanted longleaf and shortleaf pine. And we've got some shortleaf seed sources out there too. And he said he stumbled across my paper, but that he was a decade ahead thinking about this. But to me, this looks great. He's been burning it every 2 years. He's got ample regeneration. He's got a flammable species in the overstory providing fuel. So it's a really flexible system. You just have to be creative, keep fire on it. So now, throughout most of my career, Forest Service at least, what I'm tasked with is primarily restoring these two species, longleaf and shortleaf pine. And this is a map of its importance value throughout their historical ranges. And you can see, except for a few locations around the Florida Gulf Coast and in the Sand Hills region of the Carolinas, we're playing from behind a bit. There's just not a lot out there compared to what there used to be. And the same thing is really true with shortleaf. Outside of its really main base there in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and a little bit in Missouri, it is really declined throughout all of their ranges. So when we're working with these species, we simply don't have a lot of them out there. You know, the classic figures that have been thrown out, Jim Goulden, we went from 37 million hectares longleaf pine dominance down to about 2. We basically stabilized the loss and gone up a little bit, but I mean, we're not there. We're probably not, I don't think 37 million hectares is the goal. But we have at least stabilized and they're starting to slowly grow back. Shortleaf pine is the same story, 30 million hectares down to about 2.5. So getting back to the point I started with, what's really important with this system is the grass. If you can get the grass, pretty much all things are possible in terms of management. What you're looking at is a picture from the Escambia experimental forest where they're managing longleaf pine with group selection. And this is a shade intolerant species. A lot of people wouldn't think you'd even be able to do a small group selection or single tree selection, but we have them all out there at Escambia. And they're showing that classical dome regeneration shape that comes from not a competition from light. It's not a light limited system. See how much the trees prune up in the longleaf system. What that dome is showing is a lack of root competition. It's a root free zone that allows the trees to grow up faster. It's also an area where the fires burn less intense because we have less litter fall coming from the overstory. So that kind of combines and you get regeneration a lot of times in that dome shape in the center of the gap. Same thing with shortleaf. This is a really interesting stand where they did a single tree selection, or excuse me, a seed tree harvest with shortleaf pine, but they've maintained some of their xerophytic flammable hardwoods, like southern red oak, in the stand. And you can see this, you have ample regeneration. Getting pine regeneration is not hard. Just keeping fire on the ground and keeping enough seed sources out there, and you will get it over time. So really fun system. It's truly a joy to work with once you get it to this point. Problem is getting it to this point because most of the landscape we're working with looks like that. Okay, so just thinking out loud about some of the differences. working from top to bottom, obviously we've gone from an open canopy to a closed canopy. We've got a mid-story in place. Our herbaceous layer has been replaced largely with woodies. And underneath there, we have an organic layer. Now, it's not as thick as you might think. Would you be surprised if I told you they burn that every 3 years for 25 years? That's what it looks like. I think there's some balance to what we can do with fire. It's not a get out of jail free card. It's not, you can't use it everywhere. Where I had a very frank conversation with managers. What are we accomplishing? We're holding it in place, but we're not actually getting anywhere in construction. I think we're going to need to move our tools in a different direction. But so this is our starting place. More times than not, out of the landscape. One of the issues you have out there is we simply do not have seed sources. Okay, longleaf pine, like the other southern pines, it's a 2-year cone process between when the catkins and the conelets emerge in the winter. The pollen season in the spring, and really the big gap is they don't get fertilized until January or March of the next year, and then the cones begin to develop and disperse anywhere between October and January. The maximum is typically October to November. So it's a two-year process for cones. Typically, when they start producing age, cones and natural stands, 20 to 30 is kind of the kind of think that's true. In seed orchards, you see it in 12 to 15. A new trend, which is really surprising, planted agricultural fields. You're actually seeing, I didn't believe it until I saw it, you're seeing cone production in 9 years. There's a picture of that. That's a study that we have. Those are 9-year-old trees. So we think it's a phosphorus, but these old peanut fields, a legacy of phosphorus in the soil that's possibly grabbing this. I have no explanation for what that is, but every once in a while you see that. I mean, that could be, and I'll talk about the grass stage in a bit, but that could be a 45-year-old tree, biologically. So what you're looking at here is, at least to my knowledge, one of the longest continuous records of cone production. This has been going on. When we do it in the next month or so, it'll be the 60th year of continuous collection of the longleaf pine ecosystem. So we've done this over 12 sites throughout its range. And the thing I just like to point out with this is a good crop is considered you need to get at least 50 cones from 50 and 100. On average, over these 60 years, happens about once a decade. So we don't get good cone crops here, unlike the other southern pines. It's just really sporadic. All right. The last time we had a really good cone crop was 2014 region-wide. And that's creating big problems because where do all our seeds come from for the artificial regeneration? Come from these good cone years. They've got a freezer life of about 3 years. We've had 3 really poor years in a row. So they're starting to run low, getting very worried, hoping that we're going to have a good seed crop or cone crop this year. A couple things I'll point out, just we don't want to get into the weeds too far here, but 4 sites, Scambia's in southern Alabama, Blackwater's in northern Florida, Jones Center's in southwest Georgia, and Sandhills are in South Carolina. And just looking at this, you can see it is rare to get synchrony geographically across the landscape. You see a little bit of a pattern. 2014 was the last year it really kind of synced up, but it was stronger regionally in that Georgia, southern Alabama, northern Florida area than it was in the Sandhills. And so there's a lot of asynchrony in terms of getting cone production. And we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why that is. We still don't have a great answer, to be honest with you. You see a lot of variability in the stands. Within individual stands, you have super producing trees. Thinking of Jones Center in particular, there's one tree that we've tracked over time and averages 65 cones a year, every year, no matter what. Other trees, they never produce. They're like 4, 5 cones a year, something like that. These are essentially the same age trees on the same site, managing the same basic structure. So there's either a microsite thing going on there or a genetic thing going on there. Some combination of both is probably contributing. So there's a lot of asynchrony across stands throughout the region and even within stands. This is problematic because we like to time our fire for good cone crop. You just never know when it's going to happen. So the reason I introduce this is that it is a real problem, but it allows me to talk about the legend of the hurricanes, which invariably whenever people have seen me speak, give this talk, they always come back with questions about the hurricanes. So I wanted to introduce you guys to this. When I was in Mississippi, and since I've been out throughout the region a year, we talk about longleaf pine and cones, and we talk about how sporadic. I give the same spiel I just told you guys. Invariably, you get somebody in the back, usually an old timer, go, just wait for a hurricane. You'll hear that. What? And okay, so I heard it at least 7 or 8 times in different meetings. So I was talking to a colleague of mine at the Jones Center, Jeff Cannon, about this, and he got the truth. And so what we did is these are all our cone counting sites that we've been monitoring all the cone count set throughout the years. He went out and tracked 56 storms that have occurred that have sustained hurricane winds within 93 kilometers of our cone counting sites during the time period which we counted cones. Now this myth, wait for the hurricanes. And sure enough, so on this graph, time 0 is the year of the hurricane. Here's year 1, so that's hurricane 2 and 3. Remember, it's a 2-year cone cycle. And this graph, how to interpret it, anything above 1, means it's above average cone production. Look at the pattern, well, yes, there's noise for sure. And it's not the strongest relationship, but indeed we did. We saw a bump over time across all these sites 2 years after a hurricane. So there's some myth in listening to your elders, or there's some value in listening to your elders. Now explaining exactly why that happened, I won't say that we nailed the mechanism, but we looked at several things. We looked at a reduction in competition. We looked at moisture inputs throughout the year, because hurricanes obviously dump a lot of precipitation on a site. And we looked at wind. And the strongest relationship we found was with wind. And it was a decreasing relationship to where essentially the stands that produced the best had kind of a lowish rocking wind where the trees would get rocked, but not necessarily destroyed. So that, it's a little bit, to me, unsatisfying that we haven't really explained the mechanism of this yet. I'm trying to get Jeff to get out there. We're going to get a cone shaker and try to simulate some of this tree rocking and manipulate around the trees in ways that to create dynamics that would be similar to a hurricane to try to get at this better. But nevertheless, we did see a trend of hurricanes. It tends to be related more to wind speed than other factors. So that's the legend of hurricanes. All right, let's get back to the shade. Some of the problems that we have. One of the things you get is get into the musification dynamics, right? Species have zones of influence in your stand. So we're in this example that colleague Heather Alexander put together. You've got oak trees, which is your classic fire-promoting species, versus a mesophyte. Your oak trees that generally have shallower open crowns. They have rougher bark, and their litter tends to decompose slower, opposed to a mesophyte, which has a more complete crown. It's thicker. They have smooth bark, which allows more stem flow to get water around the base of the tree, and their litter tends to break down faster. So if you can imagine spatially in a stand, this is your typical open oak woodland or pine woodland, where you've got a lot of fire-promoting species in their zones of influence. Well, this is what we're working with in a closed forest ecosystem quite a bit. So we've got very few islands of flammability within a sea of things that inhibit fire. All right, so you can see here, this is some experimental plot work we did, a plot with 100% longleaf pine. Remember, I called it gasoline. That's 1 year's worth of, that's a 1 year input of longleaf pine litter versus sweet gum. That was the most board fired tree you'll ever see in your life. So we know those relationships exist at the species level, but that's not how forests work. Don't typically in natural stands have monocultures, many species. So we wanted to ask the question, what happens when you put these species in mixture? What are the critical thresholds you have? And so we built these different mixtures. Now I'm showing 2, but there's 3. And the idea is we want to look at a stand that's at the beginning stages of being getting encroachment from mesophytic species. So we had the field bed with 60% longleaf pine, 30% southern oak, and 10% sweet gum. Toward at the other end of it, at the late end of mesophytic invasion, where longleaf pine is down to 10% of the litter. Southern red oak stays at 30, and sweet gum is 60. We have an intermediate in there as well. And we looked at some flammability characteristics. These are not all of them, but what we found is a pattern in general. that is, as long as we keep 30% of the longleaf pine with that southern red oak mixed in, we tend to at least maintain our flammability comparable to if we have 100% long pine, much more than obviously if we have 100% sweet gum. So there is some resilience in terms of flammability in the fuel bed over time, as long as we can keep that threshold. We see the same general pattern with maximum temperature. We see the big fall off. We've maintained it okay at 30. We see a big fall off once we get into that 10% mixture. So there is an effect. Longleaf pine and southern red oak can hold on, but there is a tipping point in the stand when they begin to lose flammability. Fuel is only part of the story. Looking at another project we did, we looked at the mid-story. And so the mid-story, we did this in a stand that had gone through your classic encroachment, where the smaller size classes are dominated by encroaching species. And we've got pine and upland oak in the larger size classes. So we wanted to remove the mid-story. There's a picture of it right there. And the thing I want to point out is, in terms of fuel, so this is the before and this is the after. We took out all the encroaching species in the mid-story. We didn't do much with fuel. Only a little bit of reduction in the fine woody debris and a little bit in the coarse woody debris, but largely it was unchanged. So this isn't really a fuel story. It's a structure story of air moving through the stand, of fuels drying because the light's hitting the forest floor, more so than any change in the amount of fuel that's out there. And what we found is, in short, our treatments did absolutely nothing for flammability. Removing the mid-story had no impact on fire line intensity, the fuel consumption, the rate of spread, or the maximum temperature. But there was a couple cool aspects of this story. One, consistent with what we found before, the fuel bed, the amount of pine litter, as you increased in the mixture, we were getting more flammable over time. So that overstory time truly did matter in the mixtures and driving the flammability. And two, and this is the thing that I found striking, we burn these in different seasons. So we have early dormant season, late dormant season, growing season. So February, April, June. We could not push that fire through June, regardless of whether we had a mid-story or not. It just dropped dead. Okay. Why does that matter? It matters because we like to burn in the summer to kill a lot of the mid-story encroaching hardwoods. And two, from an understory perspective, we stimulate a lot of the understory species of some burns, but we're not able to push fire through it. And it's not the mid-story that's doing it. It's simply the overstory control on the stand. So removing the mid-story for restoration to hope to push fire through, at least in the summer, isn't going to get you anywhere. All right, we'll shift gears and start talking about using fire as a silvicultural tool. And it's a very simple question. How does fire kill trees? With a very complex answer. In short, okay, we won't go through all these, but what you end up getting is fire is either going to injure the cambium or phloem, preventing the movement of photosynthase roots, killing the roots, thereby killing the ability of the tree to gather more photosynthase, leading to the eventual death. Another thing that can happen is you can degrade or completely cause failure in the xylem. So you're unable to move water to the crown, causing eventual loss of being able to produce photosynthase and eventual death. Third main mechanism is weaken the tree, and you allow biotic agents to get in there and do damage. So those are the three primary pathways in which fire allows or creates tree death. Now, the two species that were largely charged for restoring, longleaf pine and shortleaf pine, require that. The longleaf pine is one of approximately 10 species worldwide that has the grass stage. So just pictures of the grass stage where essentially the tree does not put on any vertical height growth until it has developed its root system and its stem to some critical size thresholds, at which point it will emerge from the grass stage and grow like any other pine tree. But these species, while being shade tolerant or intolerant, it can sit in the grass stage for over 27 years. How many shade intolerant species can do that? It's not that shade tolerant grass stage. It becomes shade tolerant during later in its life. So that's really one of the tricks and one of the secrets to longleaf pine. In the grass stage, it's all about defense. So this is a 2-year-old longleaf pine seedlings that we planted. Look at that I call it a fortress of needles, protecting the bark, the cambium, and the terminal bud. You can see the bark thickness that's developed after just 2 years. Another example of fortress. So these needles have a high moisture content. So imagine a fire going through there. That moisture evaporates, taking energy away from the fire, dissipating it away from the terminal bud. That's really shown here nicely. We just did this about a month ago. And as part of that experiment, we deconstructed the grass stage. And we said, well, what's really the importance of the needles? Are they protecting the cambium or the terminal bud? It's way too early to say. Again, we did this about a month and a half ago. But we did this on 50 seedlings where we took all the grass stage away. We protected the terminal bud. We insulated it, and 48 of them look like that. So I think the answer is the terminal bud. Okay, a lot of people don't think about this, but a lot of conifers sprout, and longleaf pine is one of them. It will only do it in the grass stage. It loses this ability, but it can sprout. One of the things we don't know is whether these sprouts become viable trees in the long term, or whether it's just a short-term stress mechanism to try to stay alive. But they are capable of sprouting. Non-structural carbohydrates. This came from a study prior to a burn where we evaluated 6 different species. You can see longleaf pine more than double that in shortleaf pine, and more than that in loblolly pine. So they're keeping a bank of resources underground in their roots, allowing them to kind of defoliate, repair tissues damaged in fire. Shortleaf pine. Shortleaf pine has a basal crook. And that essentially is the same. It's a structure where they store a lot of non-structured carbohydrates. It's also where they have a lot of dormant buds. So after a fire, it's not unusual. You'll see anywhere between 8 to, I've seen 46 sprouts coming off of shortleaf pine. They will do that. So they're about 8 to 12 years old. Sort of lose that ability. But really, shortleaf pine, think of it like an oak. It's very similar to managing an oak. It has a lot of ability to sprout. It doesn't grow all that fast. So it's sort of intermediate, like loblolly. Okay, back to the shade and the problems we have. You're a longleaf pine and shortleaf pine, you've got to live underneath there. And from a management perspective, we want to put fire in that stand. So we asked the question, how's that going to work? So we planted 6 species. We have longleaf, shortleaf, loblolly, and we have 3 parklets. We have northern red oak, mock-nut hickory, and yellow poplar. We grew them for 2 years under the shade environments because we wanted to really get the effects of shading embedded in the tree's morphology. And then we removed the shade and applied a late spring fire where we put 1 year's worth of fuel down underneath the shade. We removed it, burned them, and then put the shade on and grew them for another year. You can see those are structures we use to protect some of the seedlings from heat to create a control, but that's the immediate aftermath of the burn. And a couple take-home notes about fire and shade. One, loblolly pine, which is kind of this, the last part of the blue, didn't really matter in terms of our shade level. We knocked loblolly pine out of fire. That's consistent with its traits. It tends to have thinner bark and does not sprout as readily after fire as shortleaf and longleaf will. In terms of the longleaf story, you see a nice clear trend of, it's the 3rd blue bar there, of increasing mortality as we increase in shade. Shortleaf pine was way more pronounced. Mortality jumped up rapidly when we got up to 63% shade at the time. Now, I'll say, and I'll get to this in a second, that's a mix of sprouting and resisting fire for longleaf and shortleaf pine, whereas our hardwoods, it was all sprouting, okay? And I'll say this about mock-nut hickory, you're not going to kill mock-nut hickory fire. It is very difficult to get mock-nut hickory out of the stand, regardless of what level of shade you have. All right, so we had quite an interesting mix of dynamics with our different species in this treatment. If you look at longleaf and shortleaf, this is the mode of survival. So how did they live? Well, you have resisting, which they were not top killed. So your original stem is living, still growing, versus sprouting. And again, this is both species. Resisting was the predominant mode of survival at no shade and 63% shade for both species. But once we got up to 73%, we really shifted into a sprouting survival strategy. And that matters because, again, we don't know if longleaf pine is going to survive as a sprout. It's something we just don't know at this point going forward. So sprouting becomes more prevalent as we see things grow in shade. Looking at the recovery over time, the longleaf, shortleaf, burned and unburned, you know, the fact that the burned ones are shorter is not that surprising to me. But the important thing to point out is that as you get down to these higher levels of shade, their height for longleaf is about 15 centimeters, and for shortleaf it is about 30 centimeters. They're going to be buried beneath herbaceous vegetation when they come out. So if you're not releasing them at all, even though they survive, they're going to have a hard time making it through the next growing season. The other neat thing that happened, at least with non-structured carbohydrates, is this pattern with shortleaf pine. As we went from no shade down to 73% shade, we see the steady decrease in non-structured carbohydrates, essentially telling you that shortleaf has expended all it had, or a lot of what it had, regrowing its tissues to sprout and getting to the same size, or getting back to as large as it could. Whereas our hardwood competitors, mock-nut hickory, northern red oak, they're actually banking for non-structured carbohydrates of size. So what that says to me is that that next fire that we put in there, mock-nut hickory, northern red oak, have been better equipped to stand that or repair damage over time. So we're going to run into some problems of doing repeated fires to try to release shortleaf pine in this situation. All right, let's get out of the shade. Let's go back to where we like to manage. Let's go into the open light longleaf system. And one of the things we like to do is burn in the dormant season. One reason for that is logistics. We just have people, as most of our federal staff are here training prescribed burn. They get shipped out west about a month where they'll be gone. So there's a strong dormant season culture for burning. The other is weather. We have cold fronts that'll blow in. We get real stable weather for about 4 or 5 days. We get low humidities. We can really do a lot of burning. So get a cold front blows through, get a heavy rain event, let it dry down for a day. You've got about a 3 to 4 day burn window, which is really stable and consistent. So there is a culture of dormant season burning. There's also the advantage of burning when non-structured carbohydrates are below ground. This is from multiple studies looking at non-structured carbohydrate dynamics of longleaf pine. You can see it peaks in April. And in about July, it really starts sliding down. That's when they put out the second cohort of needles. And in the fall, it really falls off before it starts to fill up. So there's all these reasons to burn in the winter. And there's another reason. Really, when longleaf pine exit the grass stage, when it becomes a bolt or candle, that's when they're really vulnerable to fire because they leave a lot of their protective structures. And this is what gets exposed to the flame front. Okay, so there's all these reasons why we're burning in the dormant season. And then there's this pervasive myth that somehow developed that do anything you want, you can't go on. Longleaf pines fire that. And we were looking at it, well, that's true or not. So what we set out to do is do everything wrong. We tried to break the system to find out what the thresholds are of how do you kill these trees so that land managers don't mess it up. Okay. So we did 2 burns. This is from 2022. We did absolutely everything wrong. The relative humidity was about 31% this day. It was a 7-year rough on it where we hadn't been burning, so we let the fuel accumulate. And lit it at about 2:30. We lit strip head fires. We let them run together. So what happens if you strip head fires, the fire pulls together. When they come together, you see explosions that happen like that. This is the scariest day of my career. Even more than comps, Rich is mine. We had, I want to say 25 to 30 foot flame rings within a minute in that stand. And it was like a hurricane. It was like a locomotive blowing through it. We had the Alabama Forestry Commission flying over within 15 minutes. Lots of people were interested in what we were doing that day. Timber company was calling my phone. But our goal was we wanted to see, can we kill these things? Can we kill seedlings, saplings, and larger trees if we do everything wrong? Okay, and so that was the first burn in 2022. We tried to do it again in 23. We rain fired it. tries to do the same basic thing with fire pulls together and explodes. Just didn't have the relative humidity on that day. So we ended up with more of an intermediate fire. We're looking at the max temperatures we got. So we got close to 500 degrees C. And the medium fire, we got close to 300 degrees C. That matters because 60 degrees C, that's the temperature at which most living tissue dies in a fire. So we created the opportunity for mortality. All right, so the other thing we did is we stressed some saplings because we showed that non-structural carbohydrates are a big part of one leaf pine strategy. So on a segment of our seedlings and saplings, we kept them pruned for over a year to keep them from reloading their non-structural carbohydrate reserves. So what you're looking at is the mortality of the high intensity, which is in red, and the medium intensity in blue. First for the grass stage, you see a definitely declining trend, medium intensity with crown width of our grass stage seedlings, whereas there's a generally flat relationship at the high intensity. When we stressed them, we see basically the same curve at medium intensity, but we bumped up mortality by about 15% under stress. But the saplings is where things really got interesting. Just burning, again, we had very high mortality with our small root collar diameters. And that decreased obviously with size, but much more so in the medium intensity fire than the high intensity fire. But when we stressed them, we almost saw 100% mortality across the board compared to non-stress. So can you kill these things? Yes. Is it hard to do? It is. You got to do a lot of things wrong, but they're not impervious to fire. It can happen. Why does that matter? Remember, it takes almost 10 years to do the pump crop. Yeah. So you don't want to be losing all that work you put in by running a fire irresponsibly through burning it extremely hot. You can kill seedlings and saplings. So this is what we ended up doing by size class. Essentially, we removed that from 1 to about 3.5 from the stand. We have a lot of grass stage. We have things between 5 meters and 7 meters tall. We killed only 2 overstory trees, trying to do everything wrong, killed 2 trees. I have killed overstory trees before along with the fire, but it was actually an insect-related thing. We burned. We got not nearly as hot as that, but it was on the hotter end of things. It just happened that we had pitch steel in the area that got into the trees. It can happen, but they are very, very species. So just so you don't go home and say, man, this guy went to Michigan State and all he cares about is killing trees. We did look at other relationships. So those fires allowed us an opportunistic situation where we could look at strategies of the surviving trees. Okay, so what we were interested in here is if you survive the fire, are you more competitive if you can absorb limiting nutrients? So in the South, like most places, nitrogen and phosphorus, in particular phosphorus, is our limiting soil nutrient. So in this world in which we imagined, the surviving saplings would potentially have the ability to take phosphorus from their needles, the tissue most in danger of death, and absorb it back into their branches, which typically survive fire, at least are more protected from fire. And there's a time aspect to this. So 2 weeks is when they start to show damage of scorch. 4 weeks is when they drop needles. So if you're going to get it out of your needles, it has to be done within 4 weeks, typically. And at 24 weeks, they're refoliating again. So these are the needles and woody tissue. So we're looking for a trend of transfer from needles to woody tissue, and looking at it at trees that were burned at high intensity, low intensity, or unburned, with the idea that it would be the low intensity trees that weren't severely burned and weren't immediately killed, they might have the opportunity to move nutrients more than those that were killed at high intensity. And if you look at the trends, at least between the high intensity, low intensity, and unburned groups, at 4 weeks, you see considerable overlap compared to where we were at 2 weeks. When they refoliated, a big separation between the high intensity, low intensity, and unburned groups. And that's small text, but comes phosphorus is in there. So that made us interesting. Some of it interested us. The story is not as clear with the woody tissue necessarily, but it looked like there was a possibility that they were moving nutrients from their needles. But we looked at this, just comparing the low intensity, high intensity, unburned to the foliar nitrogen and foliar phosphorus over time. Either it was higher at low intensity than the control, or you saw no difference in phosphorus. Okay, and we saw no relationship with woody nitrogen. When we measured it, this is a index of resorption proficiency. Long weed pine saplings were intermediate in terms of nitrogen and incomplete in terms of phosphorus. So it looks as though they're not able to actually move those nutrients out. It's a soil acquisition process after which you're able to gain those nutrients. So not all ideas work. But they were fun to. It's fun to do the study. I really enjoyed it. All right, let's get back to, and I'll wrap up with this real quick. Killing large trees. Couldn't really do it. Remember, I mentioned you had a 7-year rut, but we were in the open stand. That was a standing condition, so they were open forest conditions. They seem to be pretty tough to fire, but not impervious. If I drag you back to the shade one more time, here's the problem we get in these long unburned stands. You get this accumulation of duff around the base. So that's deep mounds of bark, needles, cones that just build up over time. So you build these very large, spongy organic layers. Okay. And in terms of, you get the mound as you go decreasing away depth from the tree. They tend to be around the older, larger trees. Obviously, they have more biomass. Well, you run a fire through this, doesn't necessarily burn all that hot, but it'll smolder down. Right? So here's an example of a study we're working on right now in Prattville. That is 3 days after the fire, where I just sat on it, burned for 300 degrees C for a long period of time. And what ends up happening for the tree is their roots will grow into that duff layer. They're going after nitrogen and phosphorus, which are primarily in the upper layers of the soil. And so when you get a fire like this, you have a lot of fine root mortality. And essentially you cut off the root system for that tree. It doesn't necessarily kill them immediately, but it puts them at risk, specifically for drought in the subsequent years. And if we look at this, what this is, the Morgan Barner's work showed, year one, either across different moisture levels, you see nothing, absolutely no mortalities. Walk away and say, not a big deal. But in year two, this really starts to show up. We start restoring mortality, but only under dry conditions. So what that sets up in terms of a restoration strategy is you wait for a day where you get about 2 inches of rain, you get a duff moisture above 90%, and you introduce fire then. It's like peeling an onion. Okay, you're taking a small layer off, small layer off, small layer off. So you might have some root loss, but not complete, and you slowly work down the organic layer until you get it back to a place where you can manage it with a regular fire. The problem with that is it's multiple years, right? It takes a long time to get there, and you're going to lose some trees every burn because you will get smoldering. Fire's not a perfect tool. It's going to occur. So my question was, okay, at the end of doing this 10 times, we're going to have the same mortality. You just let it rip once, rip the Band-Aid off and get the mortality. Nobody knows the answer. So it's okay, silviculturally, what can we do? How do we speed this up? So a couple of things we're working on with the grad student now is different strategies to where we actively remove the duff layer. So we remove it from the bowl, only around the bowl, we're removing it there. We remove all the duff to the drip line. Or we take a bobcat and we put a cutting head on top, run it down, and we essentially masticate all the duff layer up, spread it that way. So there are advantages and disadvantages for all of them. Mechanical, you can do a lot of trees quickly, but you also have the risk of doing a lot of damage to your trees. These are for blowing the duff layer out with handheld blowers. That still takes a lot of time to do. So it's an efficiency, effectiveness kind of thing that we're looking at. And in these treatments, we have our conservative fire built in, and we have accelerated fire, where we introduce fire normally. We don't wait for that 2-inch rain and then wait for a couple of days. We burn normally, and it's accelerated to see if we can actually get these trees, get the fuel levels down and still maintain the trees. And we're monitoring the progress of these point dendrometers, which sends us a data point every 15 seconds for 10 years. So we can get really good trends in terms of climate over time. This is only 7 months old, so I don't want to draw any trend of what's going on here. This will be developed over time. But it's a neat study, I think. We're working with a grad student at Auburn with, look forward to reporting these results in the future. So with that, I've taken my time. Thank you guys for coming. I really do appreciate it.
Sure.
Why not?
Yeah. So, love what you showed really, to me, with regard to species silvage, when you burn, how you burn, your fire regime, suggests that maintaining these systems, you got that figured out. But a lot of what you do and suggests to me you're not getting rid of the hardwoods in the. What do you do to get rid of those? And you showed that picture from Tall Timbers of this is your typical mess, basically. We have all these hardwoods and you have some of the pines that you want, et cetera.
Yeah.
How do you get rid of what become oak grubs, I guess, and things like that, right? If you bring there a few times.
So it's challenging because let me go back to this picture because it's easier. This is the thing that messes up land managers quite a bit. There is a tendency to want to go take this and immediately open it up and take that basal area down to 40, 50, whatever. That's a horrible strategy because all you're doing is releasing the understory, right? And then they're going to rapidly grow past the range of fire at all of our ability to even top kill it. And now you've got a mess. So what we're advocating is now, so right now when we don't have the herbaceous out that you want, that now's the time to use herbicide. Now, prep the understory using herbicide, then reduce the overstory slowly because you still have, if you have oaks in the overstory, you're fine. If you have wildball, you're fine. You just don't want to have water oak, sweet gum, things like that. And slowly reintroduce fire. You can use things if you do have desirable understories like Carlon. It's a better herbicide that's going to save a lot of your grasses. Because again, like I started, the grass is the hard part of all this. It takes you decades to get the grass. Don't blow it by putting glyphosate out there and set yourself back 20 years, right? So take care of the problem first. You don't have the herbaceous out there, herbicides. Then reduce the overstory. Then introduce fire. Periodically use herbicides as a hat and squirts to maintain the things that fire is not keeping down. Eventually, you'll work the problem. It's just not rapid, right? You have to stay committed to it. And that's the thing about the South. Again, you miss a burn rotation, maybe it's not the end of the world. You miss two, you're in problems real quick.
Was the mid-story removal, you're testing the chronic season versus late and early dormant season, was that a cut and remove situation or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a cut stumps, they applied Carlon to the stumps, did them spreading back and took all the vegetation out of the plots.
Do you think it would have been effective had you left the stuff behind the burn?
It's a good question. I think it would have helped a bit, but in terms of the biomass there's small stems, and igniting them isn't going to increase as much heat as like a pine needle does. So can't say for certain, but I think the value of that is more than just that it's first not having that we have that down there. The thing I will say, the caveat to that though is I think we need to go back because there's a legacy of our litter layer in that stand for the mid-story still being there that hadn't worked itself through yet in decomposition. We do it again in another couple of years when you have potentially lower litter levels.
So we have like 700,000 million acres of red pine plantations across the Lake States.
Yes.
And a lot of those will probably be replanted red pine or allowed to go to hardwoods. One of the options for systems like that, kind of ready-made because you have mature trees, is that on the right sites, one could restore natural red pine mixed oak red pine communities in those system. And I'm guessing there's some similarities in approaches. Have you thought about using some of these southeastern hatch techniques on Lake States forests?
Yeah, we thought about it quite a bit. I think there's great promise, and using existing red pine, because I think about things now in terms of fuel. I think forest types, right? As long as I have red pine there, or even if it's undesirable scrub oak, that's fine. Because what I'm trying to get, it's helping me try and get what I want.
Yeah.
Ultimately. So I think there's great potential to do it. You gotta get your prescribed burning costs
Have to do what?
down. Get your prescribed burning costs down.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else different about it ecologically, or do you think it's really a real similar
Probably
problem?
the speed at which things happen, because your decomposition is going to be slower here, and your repeating vegetation is going to be less intense. And so I think you'd be able to get away with longer burn rotations if you wanted to. I'd be interested to see if you could really get aggressive with fire and drive change here more effectively than you can in the south, so because of productivity differences. Yeah.
I think the current understanding is that in the north here, in our red pine stands, our natural pine, a lot of Native American burning was a high probability of a lot of fire for the Native American work versus lightning strikes. How is that different in the south? Is it heavier to, so 2 to 4 years across large swaths of the landscape? Is that more natural, non-Native American fire that's igniting, or?
Highly contentious issue. I think it's a both. I don't think anyone would argue that both are playing a role. It's just who, whether one is down or not, it depends a little bit who is there. The Native Americans tended to ignite fire in the northern season. A lot of our lightning strikes are in the summer, so they attributed growing season fire to lightning strikes, but that's no guarantee. Also, nobody was around. All of that. I think it's important that we have fire in all seasons, because we get into these ruts of burning in dormant season. I didn't show it. One of the things we do, when you burn, every animal out there wants to be at that site next week. It's like a magnet. So if you burn in the dormant season, things like inkberry are the only thing with fruits that time of year. So birds are going to eat what's there. They're going to take it to that site. Right? So what you're creating is a magnet for a vector of inkberry fruit. Inkberry burns incredibly hot. So usually we see increases in biodiversity when we burn, but if you continually do it in the same season at the same interval, you're actually driving down biodiversity in some situations.
Is the plan that I think it was a lot of saying that you were like structurally changing to more of a longleaf open condition? Is the plan to underplant with longleaf pine then, or how would that work?
Yeah, I think again it goes back to your goal. I think you can definitely underplant with longleaf or shortleaf if you want to, but I think the thing I'm interested in is, do you have to? Because to me, I mean, shortleaf and longleaf will live longer than loblolly, no doubt. But we're talking about the south. Okay, longleaf can live 400 years. What's the probability it's going to avoid a lightning strike, a hurricane, a tornado, insect outbreaks, and human timber markets over 400 years? Not good. Whereas I can grow a loblolly very quickly. And if I need to, I think with a loblolly, I can get out of jail free card, because the storm comes through, I can grow structure back pretty quickly with loblolly. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe I don't get everything I would get with a longleaf or shortleaf system, but if I get 80%, that's good enough. Especially for wildlife habitat, where structure is very important. That's what a lot of this is driven towards, this wildlife habitat. In terms of RCWs, they may prefer longleaf, but they use all the southern pines, so long as they're big enough. We have rough bark, and we have that herbaceous understory. Yeah.
So is the commercial timber harvesting in these open pine systems, or is it largely, is your work motivated mostly from a conservation perspective?
So
It's both, so.
yeah, we will grow out of structure very quickly. And in terms of for RCWs, I think it's 90 is the top end of where you want to be. If they're not happy, you can get up 90 square feet. So you do have to harvest occasionally to maintain the structure that you want inside the trees that you want. In particular, we have issues with mills because they're not accepting big logs. So you can grow this big, fantastic pine tree that's left as much as bulk. And so there is a lot of pressure that's still in systems, and that's why it's important to have that regeneration going, so you can maintain structure as you first.
I think it's right on time and that it's given on that land.